All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today in this afternoon's webinar. My name is Daniela Labate, and I'm from NIAPRS, and we are a MCTAC partner. Today's webinar is the second in a series that followed up our in-person supervision trainings, and those took place back in August. So today's webinar is titled Supervision Difficult Conversations. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping slides to go through. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the slides can be found on the MCTAC website in approximately 2 days. We've set aside some time at the end of the webinar for questions, so we do encourage you to type in your questions throughout the webinar in the chat box to all panelists. This is our MCTAC Plus partner slide, and as you can see, along with NIAPRS, MCTAC Plus is a partnership with the Managed Care Technical Assistance Center at NYU McSilver, along with ASAP, the Coalition, and Families Together. For those of you that are new to MCTAC Plus offerings, we're a part of the larger Managed Care Technical Assistance Center, and we focus training and technical assistance in smaller group settings, which allows for a more tailored discussion, and these services are available for all adults and children's behavioral health providers throughout New York State. So before I turn the controls over to Ruth Colón-Wagner, I just want to give you a little bit of a background on Ruth. Not only is she one of my coworkers at NIAPRS, but she also manages various systems transformation initiatives, which includes individualized technical assistance to organizations around the nation on organizational culture change, from traditional care to a recovery-oriented system of care, technical assistance on building infrastructure, organizational capacity, and board development. And her other specialties include group facilitation, program management, and compassion fatigue. So I just want to take a minute to say welcome to Ruth. And in case you, something just happened to my slides. I don't know if our, there we go. I was going to say if someone can advance the slides for me. Okay, so just so you know a little bit more about NIAPRS, NIAPRS is a statewide coalition of people who use and or provide community mental health recovery services and supports, and we're dedicated to improving social conditions for services for people with psychiatric disabilities by promoting their recovery, rehabilitation, and rights. So Ruth, I am going to pass the ball over to you so you can start us off, and we will catch you at about 10 of with some questions and answers.
All right. Daniela, thank you so much, and thank you, MCTAC, and thank you everyone who's on the line. This is so very exciting. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I've got to tell you, Daniela, just before I start the webinar, that I was very impressed that you didn't read the entire bio, because it really is just blah, 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 blah. So thank you.
I gave you the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, you did. You did. So great job. Thank you so much. So everyone, today what we're going to target, get it, the target there, we're going to, number one, recognize the challenges that are inherent in the supervisor role. And I know you know that there are many challenges. We're out there doing this role every single day. And obviously you've attended the summer in-person sessions, and you did the trauma-informed care supervision with Eve last month. And so I know you know a lot about that, and we're going to take just a different kind of spin on that today. We're also going to identify the steps necessary for successful outcomes when facing those difficult conversations, and we're going to describe the transactional analysis approach and its role in effective conversations. It's one of my favorite ways to be cognizant of how I'm speaking to another person. Okay, I finally got that working. So this is like just two of my favorite pictures. On the left, I just absolutely love this. He is such full of pride. You know, when you successfully navigate those difficult conversations that we're talking about, and when everyone comes away from them feeling hopeful and motivated to make those changes that we're talked about, this is exactly how we feel. It feels so good to be on the positive end of that. And then, of course, when things don't turn out so well, we end up feeling like the guy on the right-hand side, you know, so the converse becomes true. If those meetings turn sour and we struggle to keep the emotion out of it, or we struggle to stick to the facts, it can all be very draining, and we're not the only ones leaving those discussions feeling like that. So it's definitely not a win-win for anyone. So for us, being in management, we know the great rewards that we have by being in management, but there are conversely the great challenges, and having difficult conversations, delivering bad news, or discussing an uncomfortable subject, delivering one, is just one of the difficult parts of our job. And so in these disciplinary conversations, those in particular are very difficult. And as management, we can't avoid conflict. We can't avoid difficult conversations, whether they make us, uncomfortable or full of anxiety. That's one of our roles, and we have to face these. And so we have to do that in the best way possible. And I believe that's when we think about the outcome in mind. And in its simplest form, the outcomes of any difficult conversation, the purpose of those conversations is to improve employee performance and to get everything back on track. So, the big elephant in the room is that, staff avoid supervision, and do you know what? Supervisors avoid supervision as too. We sometimes find it very difficult, and it's full of anxiety, and I've been guilty of that as well. Every supervisor is also a supervisee, and so we've got that double experience here. We've got supervisees that we may not want to have supervision with because of whatever stress that brings, and we may not want to have supervision with our supervisors because of whatever stress that brings. So that's what we call the elephant in the room, that, people really do avoid supervision. And there are some excuses, and we each have different excuses. And some of the staff excuses are just, I'm too busy doing the work. Like, why should I take an hour out to do supervision when I could just be doing my work, right? How many times have we heard that or even thought of that ourselves? Or to think that there are way too many crises. I just don't have the time to set aside, or we constantly get interrupted. Or, I love this one, well, I have supervision anyway. All we talk about is paperwork or billing. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, like what actually should be discussed during supervision. The other excuse is, well, I don't need supervision. I do all my work, unlike so-and-so and so-and-so, right? There's that comparison to other people, their colleagues. And then another excuse is, well, I know how to do my job. Or even worse, another excuse is supervisors don't care about me or the people that I work with. And that's obviously the worst, because you don't want any supervisee to think that you don't care about them or the people that they work with. Supervisor excuses, I can so relate to absolutely all of these. I'm too busy. My workload in and of itself, aside from being a supervisor, is just so much that I don't have that time to be that supervision part of me. And so yes, that's one of our excuses, is that we're just too busy. Or yes, we have too many crises, because the direct care staff is dealing with crises, but you know what? We're dealing with crises too, because when crises happen, they always pull the supervisor in, as they should. Or we think, well, I have supervision when they could use that time to do their paperwork so that we in turn can bill. We're always thinking about the workload and all the paperwork that direct care staff has. And all that is, into health records or whatever system it is that you employ, all that needs to be in place before organizations can even bill. And so that is very much tied, and it's productivity, right in back of the other. Another excuse is, well, I have supervision with Joan. She's not really one of my problems, right? So there may be one or two or three or four people that are really just star employees, and you're thinking you don't need to have supervision with them because they're not one of your problem children. And so conversely, you might think to yourself, another excuse is, I really need to have supervision with Abby, as an example, because she really needs it, but I hate to do it. So why do it? And all of that comes into play, and there's all these things that, like 10 minutes before supervision start, we sort of start to get worried about. And what hopefully we'll discuss the next of today's webinar will help us to get over these anxieties and recognize, the benefits to consistent supervision. So what happens when we skip supervisions? Well, when you skip one supervision, you know what can quickly happen. It can quickly get out of hand. That skipping one supervision can lead to 2, can lead to 3, maybe not in a row, but they happen, and they will happen with more and more frequency because it's easier to continue to avoid something that you've been avoiding. So consistent supervision is important because it's a mechanism of communication. It's where we can support staff to engage in critical reflection regarding their work. We can help to increase their knowledge and skills and to discover new ways of handling situations. So all this wonderful stuff happens when we as supervisors create a safe environment in order for it to happen. So skipping supervision for the purpose of evading tough topics isn't going to solve our problems, and you know, we all know this. It'll only make the problems bigger and bigger until they hit critical mass and we can't avoid it any longer. So generally, what happens when we skip supervision? Well, this happens. This is a collage of some pictures that I found that I was able to pull together just to represent things that can happen. And so when supervision is not consistent, people can begin to feel like their work doesn't even matter to you, that they're not exposed to increased opportunities, or you're not even thinking about them for promotions or to help teach them a new thing or a new skill or some new information, a new policy to learn, and you know, everything to learn and improve their work. You're not giving them the time to do that. And you know, our work is hard enough. The direct care staff are exposed to secondary trauma, and we know that. And on top of all of that, if they don't feel supported, that can lead them to burnout. And that's when staff either leave, they become demoralized, productivity is absolutely negatively affected. And yes, there are those in the upper right-hand corner that would be completely happy with no accountability. But that, of course, leads to reduced productivity all the same. So the other side of that is that consistent supervision across the board with all staff equally benefits the individual, but it benefits the staff as a team even more. So this is where I wanted to take a moment and just go over quickly with you what is there to talk about in supervision sessions. I remember being a young direct care worker, not understanding what it was that supervision was supposed to be about. And at the time, I strongly believed that my supervisor, he didn't really understand, because what we would do, he'd end up engaging me in a conversation about each of the people that I worked with, you know, going over cases. This one, and then when I was done discussing about it, the next one, the next one, the next one. And so it felt like it was a one-sided conversation where I was just keeping him updated on the work I was doing and the progress of the people I was working with for, I don't know what, for his benefit, maybe one day if he needed to cover me if I was out sick or whatever. But it wasn't a give and take. I really wasn't getting anything back. And of course, the longer I worked and the more I went into, and then when I went into management and then I learned a little bit more, I realized that there's a lot more to supervision than just discussing the direct work. And so there is, as you see, number one, the direct practice work. And that's the clinical aspects of our work, right, and the process. So you're describing the process of the work that you're doing so that the supervisor can help to see if there's any way to improve that or to, you know, say you're really doing a great job. Then there's the job management component where they review organization, workflow, time management, et cetera. Your professional impact. Well, that means your relationship with others. It does mean your relationship with the people that you work with, but also your relationship with your coworkers. There's a discussion about, should be discussions about interdisciplinary conflict. How has, difficult discussions happened? How have they turned out? Your team relationships, et cetera. And then professional development. And this is one that sometimes is lacking, and I urge you to bring these into your supervisions, you know. So it's not all about the work here and now, but it's also about the work in the future. Who do you want to be? What career do you want to have in the future? And how can I help you get there? What skills are you looking to gain? Are you looking to learn a specific kind of counseling technique? Well, then, yes, what is that? Maybe I can help that not just for you, but for the entire team. So these conversations are a wonderful opportunity for growth of your team, but also for your professional growth, because now the supervisor knows that you're interested in X, Y, or Z, or even that you're interested in being a supervisor and a manager in your future. So all that's really important. And, you know, all of these talking points that we just listed, the four talking points, they give you information as to their overall performance, their overall productivity. But even more ambiguously, items such as conflicts with another team member, ability to follow directions, or their effective use of time. By going through all of these topics, it gives you that rich information. And that's an opportunity where you can decide to dig in a little deeper, find out if there's a significant problem there, or leave it alone for them to handle, and then ask again next time. You know, that's where your judgment, of course, comes into play. So there are supervisor responsibilities, and I'd like to go over this with you quickly. And I also want to go over with you the supervisee responsibilities, because it's all pretty critical. I mean, you'll know your responsibilities, and contrary to that, you know, it's pretty easy to understand the responsibility of the supervisee. But one of the reasons it's important to go through this is because as you're creating that supervision relationship with the person that you supervise, it's important for you to say, these are my responsibilities in this relationship, and these are your responsibilities in this supervisory relationship. Now let's talk about it. How do we feel about that? All right, so let me go through those pretty quickly. Supervisor's responsibility, number one, create a safe place, right? You want to create a place where the person feels safe. You're not going to judge them. You're not going to scream at them. You're not going to be critical. You're going to hear them out. You're going to provide them a safe place to be themselves, and you will allow them, you will share your honesty. Well, that's one here. You would be supportive. You'd be honest. You would teach them, and you would help them solve their problems and develop strategies to overcome situations, either directly with the people that they work with, but even with their coworkers, how to handle interpersonal conflicts of that sort. Part of your role is to help the staff to think about how to become more effective, for you to evaluate their role and their performance, for you to provide feedback and accept feedback. Well, that sounds pretty simple. Now, a supervisee's responsibility is to foster a collaborative working environment. And you know what? Just back here a moment, it wasn't listed there, but that is one of your responsibilities, obviously, is to foster a collaborative working environment. To be respectful and honest and open to learning new strategies and approaches to your work. One of the things that you're going to model for them, right? And so if you're not open to learning new skills, strategies, and approaches, then they're not going to be either. And I just want to ask you, have you ever worked with someone who knows everything, who doesn't see that they need to learn new ways of thinking or even working? And sometimes, I know I have, sometimes we find ourselves supervising this kind of person, and it can feel like we're pushing a boulder up a hill. And, you know, this may be a time for a discussion, and not just on job description, but also on motivation and you know, you letting them know the direction the program is going in, and where are they with that? What are they thinking in terms of the direction the program is going in? And the behaviors you're working on them to help change in their performance will also help the direction of the service or the program. And so I'm really a firm believer that we need to have clear expectations of everyone. And because, you know, if we don't set clear expectations and what they are, then we don't give them an opportunity to either meet those expectations or not meet them. And so that people need to know. You never want people to not know and feel like, oh, you know, I don't really know what she wants from me. I just don't get it. It's always an opportunity to get together and to talk, and to do that before things become difficult. And I think that's the primary reason why we're going over these these responsibility slides, because you want to form that collaborative relationship from the beginning, so that when things go wrong, you already have that. And you've got a history of being respectful, and a history of being honest and open, and a history of providing feedback and accepting feedback. So, you know, people are people, and sometimes things will always go wrong, yet try as they might. The truth is that difficult conversations are inevitable in every workplace. However great your employees may be, as a supervisor, you will eventually have to remind someone of, let's say, the dress code, or rules for tardiness, or discuss a hygiene issue, deny a promotion or a raise, or even let someone go. So there are meeting considerations. And, you know, this is now the meat and bones of these difficult conversations. And the meeting considerations, essentially, I want to ask yourself a few questions before the meeting. Start by asking yourself, what is the purpose of the conversation and the nature of the problem you'll be addressing? Let's say, just for the sake of an example, it's consistent tardiness. All right. Second, make sure you stay focused during the conversation. It's often tempting, you know, to stray from the subject as a way of lightening the mood, because, you know, we're nervous. We have a level of anxiety. They have a level of anxiety. We're trying our best to calm things down. But that lightening that mood, that can risk our message failing to get across. And so, as an example, if in this situation when we're talking to a staff member about their consistent tardiness, if we try to lighten the mood, we might say something like, oh, I've done that a few times myself. Well, the staff person may not really hear your intended message, because what they heard was that you did it too, so that it must be okay. So we always have to be clear and consistent on the message, and be careful not to lighten the mood in that particular way. All right, the next, what behavior changes are you hoping will occur because of this talk? So that's when it's really vital to make sure that your employee understands exactly what he or she needs to do or stop doing going forward. So remember, just in the slide before, we talked about setting clear expectations. So that's what we're talking about here. So in this case, with a woman or a man who's tardy, let's continue our example. The behavior change we expect to see is the staff member to show up every day on time. That's very clear cut, right? You can clearly understand that expectation. It is said in simple language, and it's clear cut, and it's also equitable. This is what you expect of everyone. Also, what would you like them to feel about the message? This is interesting. What do you like them to feel about you, the messenger? Well, I have two things that I want to get across. Number one, I want my message to be clear. It is to come to work on time every day. But number two, what I want them to come away with, thinking about or feeling about me, is that I'm treating them equally to others. I'm being fair, but I'm setting very clear expectations, and that I will follow up on this. So what facts do you have to support your position? And so prior to your meeting, this is really when you're going to gather any relevant documents, you know, copies of the agency policy and procedure handbook, for example, where it states about tardiness, and it states, you know, about a number of tardiness will lead to X or lead to Y, et cetera, et cetera. And have ready with you specific examples, dates and times and emails where this topic was discussed before, or maybe the time clock, you know, when they punched in late. All that you need to have on hand. Also, what is the history of the problem? Have all of this information with you so that you can present a clear timeline, you know, as to how you have attempted to work with this employee and change their behavior in the past. So essentially, if applicable, you'll be showing progressive discipline. So other meeting considerations, that said, there are other do's and don'ts to be aware of for handling these conversations. And let's keep these in mind. Do consider the best time and place to have this conversation. And unfortunately, there's no, magic formula for this. When and where depends on the specific circumstances. For example, letting someone go on a Friday may be insensitive, but it's also insensitive if you're going to do that Friday at 4 p.m. It's almost no good time, and so you would have to use your best judgment, and this is where I would also suggest speaking to your human resources department when it's for something of that nature. Next, do conduct the meetings face-to-face. Some of us may supervise employees who are working remotely, and that means that they're not working in your office. But make it a point to meet in person as much as possible, just in general, as you're creating that supervisory relationship. And it's best, to develop trust and all of that when you're doing that in person. And then in times like these, that's when you deliver information. When you have these difficult conversations, you do that in person, not on the phone. And face-to-face is just more humane, and it allows us as supervisors to see important nonverbal cues that we won't normally get on the phone. For example, it could be a frown, or it could even be a roll of the eyes. We just don't know how they are processing the information when we don't see their physical cues. And if you do see someone, displaying something that shows that they disagree with what you just said, it's easy enough then to follow up and say, it doesn't seem like you agree with my last statement. Do you have anything to add, where you could add those follow-up questions to probe even further. So I very much believe that those conversations must happen in person. And don't try to handle certain conversations alone. If the employee has a history of outbursts, for example, don't hesitate to invite a witness to the meeting, and not a coworker, not one of his or her coworkers. I always recommend someone from human resources when they're available. But if they're not, then someone else along your chain of command. And if that is not open to you at that time, then one of your peers, another manager, to be there with you. Also, don't get into a debate. That can happen so easily, because people are upset and they want to prove their points, and we can easily get sucked into a debate. And so, addressing this issue should entail the facts only, but never arguing the facts. It's entirely possible to be a good listener, a respectful listener, without participating in the, unproductive back and forth that can happen when you're disputing facts. And do be direct. Tact is a must. Nothing good can be gained from beating around the bush. So if an employee has a hygiene problem, be specific. They may be unaware, that it's become a serious issue. And so use phrases such as, this is going to be a difficult conversation, but it's something we need to have. And so that's obviously all of these conversations. I hope you come away understanding that these are all one-on-one private conversations, unless indicated otherwise. So the goal of the conversation is to make the employee, number one, aware of the problem, so that he or she can be part of the solution. Remember, state your expectations so that they have an opportunity to meet it or not to meet it. And do keep it professional. Restrict the conversation to the employee's performance and stay away from conjecturing, and this can sometimes be hard. Stay away from conjecturing, let's say, about the employee's motivations or their beliefs or their thoughts, which we can't completely know anyway. So, for instance, if the employee won't be getting a pay increase because she hasn't met her annual goals, there's no need for us then to go on and say that you think that the employee is disorganized and that's why they're not getting their raise. And so for this conversation, the focus has to be on the what and not the why. So this is the situation. How do you think I can help you in this area? so that next time, yes, you do get that raise. And let the conversation about disorganization, if that is indeed their issue, let that come from them. And do remind the employee of available resources such as your EAP, Employee Assistance Program. And I also want to share that with you. Your EAP is there for you, and there are many wonderful EAPs out there, and they have supports as well for supervisors. And do be compassionate. Tough conversations are difficult for the supervisor, sure, but you know they're even more harder for the employee, and that's just a fact. So don't ignore any emotional responses by the employee. Acknowledge them. For example, if an employee starts to cry or to yell, you can say things like, okay, let's take a break. Let's push the pause button for a moment. Or you know what, let's take a walk around the building. We both could use some air. And next, don't forget to follow up. Ensure that the person is feeling okay and that whatever actions were decided on at the meeting have begun, that they've started doing that. And some conversations are always difficult, but if you prepare thoughtfully and focus on specific outcomes, maintaining compassion for your employee, you'll find that your discussions go more smoothly and predictably, and over time, you'll start to feel like that really proudful guy in that picture we first showed you in this slide deck. So having successful, difficult conversations helps us to become better supervisors. And the final result should be a win-win for everyone, for us and for the employee. All right, now we're going to get into a little bit more details about the difficult conversations. If the supervisee is worked up, use calming strategies. And I would offer that I'm speaking, to people who absolutely know how to do this. People in our line of work know how to, assist people with calming down. And so, no, your supervisees are not your clients, but you know the strategies to help people to calm down. So I would say use those here. You can use breathing exercises, walk and talk. We just mentioned that before. Even offering water, tea, soda, whatever it is that you have on hand, make it more than just this very cold meeting. Second, identify and validate the emotion and the behavior. Validate the emotion and the behavior. After all, we all at some point in our careers can relate to this. If not relate with the specific behaviors, but we can relate to the emotion of walking into that office and, being sat down, so to speak. And ask the supervisee to describe only the facts. We've said this a couple of times, and we say that because it's really important. Sticking to the facts is important because people tend to leave the cognitive sphere of our brains and go completely emotional because they are emotional about what's happening. And so it's hard for people to bring the two together to be rational. And so that's where you're needed. Your critical judgment is needed for this conversation to stay on track. Them being in distress, they're probably even feeling a bit defensive, and they're going to get caught up in those emotions. So you're needed to be rational and calm there, sticking to the facts. Okay. So as you do that, help to examine all sides of the situation and different points of view. So what are other possible interpretations? Right? So this may be something you're asking the person for him or her to think about, but you're also coming with other sides, other interpretations, because before this meeting, you would have done some investigative work, some homework, spoken to some other people to get an understanding of the situation, if this was indeed something that involved other people. And then test the supervisee's interpretation and their assumptions to see if it fits the facts. And that's where a little finesse really has to come in, because people feel the way they feel, and you're now going to say, all right, I hear you feeling this way, and you're saying this, but according to the facts, this is what we have. So how do you think those two fit? My interpretation is that it doesn't, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So there's just, that you've got to bring things together in front of the person and not being judgmental, but just saying, help me understand this. Identifying the goals in solving the problem. So out of everything, this is so important. Ever come out of a meeting and say to yourself, I don't understand why we just met? You don't want that to happen to a meeting of yours. So be clear as to the purpose of the meeting. Be clear as to the outcome that you're looking for. What behaviors must change for things to get better? And then also, I had a situation I'd just like to share with you. I had a situation where an employee was, he was a little different. I thought he was just a little quirky. But an employee came to me, and it turned out that she felt he was being a little too close and actually fairly obsessed with her. And according to her, he would not leave her alone. So I sat him down and I spoke to him, and I said that we were concerned, and then his behavior became erratic. I mean, erratic to the point where he wasn't doing his job properly. He was speaking things that were just not appropriate. He was going in and out to his car and coming back in and going in and out. And so I actually became so concerned that I called the police. And they came and they searched his vehicle and found a shotgun in his car. Now, everyone was safe and no one did anything. No one was hurt, Everyone was safe, and he was taken away, and we were all safe as a result. But I think to myself, what would have happened if I ignored what she said? What would have happened if this would have been one of those times where I just would have been too tired or maybe even too anxious to approach this man, and ask about this sensitive topic, him being obsessed with another coworker. And so part of what ends up happening is, yes, these difficult conversations need to happen, and we need to understand how we feel and put those aside and then rationally go through the process. Because in the end, wow, something really terrible could have happened here. And thankfully it did not. All right, so here we've got number 7, help develop strategies. Choose a solution or an action plan that fits the goal. And this is something that you have to do together. Everything has to be done together with the person that you're talking with. So yes, you can help develop an action plan with them, but it has to be, it's almost like we're talking about the person receiving services, right? It's their action plan. It's their treatment plan or their service plan. And so help that conversation to happen, help them develop a goal and what the action plan and what that looks like. And then you're going to help them carry that out by providing them the supervision that they need in order to get X, Y, and Z to happen, and then for certain timelines to be there as well. If the supervisee is unsure of what to do next, do the pros and cons and compare the solutions. These are all very simple steps, but simple steps that we're not always used to doing with our employees, but we're used to, having these situations with the people that we service. So next, if the supervisee has no control over the situation, brainstorm grounding rules or coping strategies. And I say that because not everything is in their control. And so, for example, if they have a fellow colleague who's being a bully in their estimation, and their initial gut reaction is to lash out, right? And so you have to work on the lashing out part of this employee, as separately you work on the bullying part, if that indeed is the case, with the other employee. So they each have different action plans, so to speak, to work through. And then, of course, the follow-up through your weekly supervisions, and you're going to review all the strategies that you've taught them and that you've learned. So, all right, so here all of these techniques that we talked about and the pre-meeting considerations and the meeting considerations, they're all wonderful, but that can only happen when you've created a safe environment. And while both people, both the supervisee and the supervisor, are responsible for creating that safe environment, as the supervisor, you are the lead here, and you need to model the behavior that you expect to see in them. So how do we create that safe environment? We foster positive and collaborative relationships. And like I said before, we do that from the very beginning, from before a problem arises. We're working collaboratively with them. We're respectful and we're professional, again, from the very beginning. We're supportive, and to recognize, and this can be difficult sometimes, but hear me out. Recognize and value the supervisees, their positive traits, and their positive skills. Thinking in a strengths-based way really does help us out as we're working with our supervisees. It's almost like when we're working with other people who come to us, and you know, things may be so difficult, it's hard for you to see vulnerability in them. Well, it's the same thing with your staff. Picture them vulnerable and help them to get to a place where they're now feeling confident again in their skills, and they're less reactive and more proactive. And you can help that happen through creating the safe environment. And this is a piece of it. You know, acknowledge the power differential. It's important. Yes, there is. You're the supervisor. They're not the supervisor. And it's important to recognize that and even to say it. You know, yes, there's a power differential. I'm the supervisor. I have the final say. But you know what? I want you and all staff to tell me what you think and what you feel about certain projects. I value your input. In the end, it is a managerial decision, but I will take everything into account. And last thing here on this slide, I just want to review that although work is not a democracy, and it's really important to know that, it's a hierarchy, right? Work is not a democracy, but it's important to develop these collaborative relationships where you can value and understand each other's opinions. And supervision contract, not many people, you know, some people, actually, let me say this. People think that this is sort of a, okay, things have gone sour and let's do this. So what you can decide to do this, you know, when things have gone sour, but I recommend doing this in the beginning with individuals so that you both recognize the importance and place the importance on supervision. And so you've got this very simple agreement that says we will meet frequency and duration. So every week on a Friday at 10 a.m. for 1 hour, right? Or whatever the time frame needs to be. And you can even discuss an alternate if that ever falls through. Number 2, write down the goals of supervision, and that should change over time. Well, number 1, go back to the list that we reviewed of the, you know, what are there to talk about? What is there to talk about in supervision? That list of 4 items, where professional development is one of them. Reviewing, you know, cases are another. So that's sort of the goals of supervision needs to be a bit of all of those. And then the skills and competencies that the person would like to build and that you would like them to build. And so list those out. And you get a lot of this great information, especially number 3. You get that when it's time for a performance review and the supervisor does the review. And then at the end, there's this discussion about, you know, your future and what skills do you want to learn for the coming year, et cetera, et cetera. That's a really good time to bring that information into this contract. And this contract works both ways. You're responsible for keeping it as a supervisor. They're responsible for keeping it as a supervisee. And it provides structure and accountability to the both of you. And it's a very simple thing that we can implement. All right, so through our work with staff, you know, we help to build up the skills, which in turn has a positive impact on their performance if everything goes well, and their continued motivation to do good work and to succeed in their role. And we can support their process through our everyday communication with staff. I'm going to now go into transactional analysis, if you haven't guessed. So one model for communication that I really find helpful is transactional analysis. What is transactional analysis? Well, it was developed in the late 1950s by Eric Berne, Dr. Eric Berne, and the basis of his theory is that everyone has 3 different ego states, a parent, an adult, and a child. And these different ego states can result in a variety of thoughts and behaviors and feelings in us. And they can cause us to have different transactions or interactions, I would prefer to say. So in the first one, the parent, those behaviors are learned from our parents and other important people that have helped us through our childhoods. And the parent ego state can be both a critical one and a supportive one, and that just sort of makes perfect sense when you really think about it. Now, the adult ego state relates to the here and now rather than things you learned during your childhood. This is often thought to be the most rational part of our personality. And then the child ego state is one that goes back again to the behaviors learned during our childhoods. And depending on the influences of the early childhood, the child ego state can be free or strongly linked to parental influences. And I know this is really a convoluted slide here, but this is how transactional analysis can be when it's not working. When it is working, look at that green line right there, adult to adult. So this is how it can appear in our workplaces with our interactions with our colleagues. And the aim of every transaction should be of one adult to adult, like I said, and that is the healthiest approach. During an adult-to-adult transaction, you're more likely to find that you talk to each other respectfully, you take the time to listen to the other person, and this isn't always possible to achieve, however, and so sometimes you'll find yourself getting angry or getting annoyed by something a colleague has done. And these circumstances, it's very easy for one of us to slip into a child state mode, for example. And you could also begin arguing with a colleague, and so you slip into a critical parent mindset. And so the best thing about the transactional analysis is being aware of where you're at. And so what I want to do fairly quickly so that we leave time for question and answers is go through some of these quickly here, what they are, because I've got some examples I'd like to go through before I end. So a critical parent is the top section there. So they're essentially demanding, they're critical, they've got judgments, rules, and more rules. You know, they're authoritarian, they're black and white thinkers, traditional. They're fond of words such as always, never, must, you should, finger pointing, arms folded, harsh tone. You could easily see this presented, yes, in a parent to a child, but also in the workplace, you could see that happening. Now, a nurturing parent is someone who's caring and sympathetic, empathetic, sensitive, they're protective and warm, loving, comforting, rescuing, and even smothering. So that some of that can even happen in the workplace. And then next, let's talk about the hurt child, because the child state has two egos, a happy child and a hurt child. So the hurt child experiences shame, guilt, fear, cautiousness, rage, feelings of inferiority or humiliation, embarrassment. You know, all these things, as you know, happen in childhood as well as can happen in adulthood. Now, the happy child, they've got creative energy, there's spontaneity, intuition, joy, excitement. They feel safe, they feel loved, they feel carefree, etc. And as well, we know children who are like that, and we know adults who are like that as well in the workplace. And so here you've got the adult, and these additional adjectives just describe the adult ego state, where they're focused on the here and now, they're fact-finding, they're calm and rational. And as I keep going through these adjectives, I hope you are hearing you in here, because a lot of these qualities are qualities of supervisors. They're rational, they're problem solvers, they're calculators, they're observant, self-reflecting, they explore assumptions, right? Because we always like to stick to facts. They decide on a course of action based on the situation, fulfills responsibilities, asks the questions, what, how, when, why, whom, where, etc. So the best practice and the healthiest approach is when you're working from adult to adult. So if a coworker says to you, you know, if you've got it like a common trigger and you're aware of it, a coworker says to you, you're always, well, I'm pretty sure my gut reaction will be to lash out in a critical parent role. But the exercise of transactional analysis is just for us to be aware of which role we slipped into, and then to bring ourselves back into the adult mode as best as possible. It's very much like mindfulness in that respect. So here are some examples. All right, number one, your assistant is late for work, delaying your departure for an important meeting. A parent response would say, "You're hopeless. Will you ever learn how to manage your time?" A child response would say, "See what you've done to me? I hate it when you do this." An adult response would be, "Next time, if you know you're going to be late, I'd appreciate it if you let me know so that I can go on ahead." I hope you hear the difference in those three. All right, example number two. A new position opens up in your department. You notice that your team is tense. A parent response would say, "Don't worry, you'll live through this. Now get back to your work." A child response might be, "You're all making things hard for me." And an adult response would say, "Let's plan a time to discuss the way this changes will affect us." All right, and the last example, number three. Your team tells you that the director has set an unrealistic deadline. A parent response would say, "I don't want to hear any more complaints about you having to stay late or come in early." A child response would say, "One day I'll show her." An adult response would say, "Let's figure out how to get this done. We're a good team and we can pull this off." So we all of us have a supervisor's balancing act. And that's to affirm and value each employee equally, to communicate our expectations, and communicate early when things are unsatisfactory. And I'm going to take that a step further to remind you, communicate all the time. But yes, when things become unsatisfactory, let people know as soon as possible. Adopt a zero tolerance for whatever that is. I can't say what that would be for your service or for your agency. And always follow through. Always follow through. And so keep calm and be fierce. This is something that someone that I respect always tells me. Keep calm and be fierce in your roles as supervisors. Be fierce, be fair, and be calm, and be a role model. Now I have time for questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Ruth. So while you were presenting, we got a ton of questions. So I'm just going to jump right into them, okay?
Okay.
All right. So the first question is, how is it possible to make it a, quote, win-win situation when you're terminating an employee?
Yeah, that's really hard because essentially they're losing a job. They're losing their income. So it's never going to be a win-win. What I would prefer to say is that you leave there amicably, right? And so you create that trusting relationship from the beginning. And so when things start to go wrong from the beginning, you're letting them know. You're beginning the disciplinary process from the very beginning. And it's a conversation from the beginning when things are going wrong. You know, the next time this happens, I've got to tell you, I've been told by human resources that, you know, we're going to have to let you go, and we really don't want to do that. But you're getting, you know, low on your chances now, and how can I help you not to get that one last one before you end up being fired? And so it's that constant communication. And then at the day of the actual meeting, believe me, they know. They know you're going to be there with human resources more than likely. Those things don't happen, you know, but with the program directors by themselves or supervisors. And that's when you say, we really try to give you every opportunity possible. We wish the best for you. I'm so sorry. And then, you know, with your human resource department, decide how you're going to do references. Most organizations now just do references with date and name and, you know, you say, yes, that person worked here from such and such a date to such and such a date. So you don't ever say that they were fired. That can be an agreement at the end. Mm-hmm.
Right. You're only verifying the dates of employment, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Because one of their fears is, oh, my God, how am I going to get another job now when everybody's going to know that I just got fired? And the truth is that you're not going to share that information.
Right. Exactly. All right. Great. Thank you. So this next question is about the time frames for supervision. So this person is saying, I only have 1 hour for supervision. If I'm going to be attentive and sensitive and cover so much ground in addition to speaking about clients, how do I possibly get everything done? I often feel like I have to cut case managers off because supervision time seems to run over and we don't have any extra time.
Yeah. So I would agree to sticking to 1 hour. I would think that weekly intervals are the best. And I also think it's okay, when an hour comes by to cut it. And that keeps you really on point. And over time, you'll see, we really need to talk about this and about this and about this. Let's see what we could get in. And also, when you look at that list of things that are to be discussed, you can do one supervision, the 1 hour session on the status of the client, maybe on group services and some other things. But all those 4 things don't have to happen in that 1 hour, but make sure that they happen at least all within a given month.
All right, great. So we have a bunch of requests that are pretty similar about if you could offer any resources on strengths-based supervision, any books or articles or things like that.
I absolutely will. One of my intentions was to give you a toolkit with a lot of this information. So it's something that I already have, and I would just ask you to give me until next week to get it over to Daniela so that she can post it.
Yeah, and the other thing we can do on the MCTAC Plus side is, because we actually have a ton more questions that we're not probably going to be able to get to today, so you and I could work together to answer those, and then we can distribute them to all of the folks that attended today.
Absolutely. So we'll do the questions and then add the toolkit.
Awesome.
That sounds great.
All right. I am going to ask you maybe 2 more questions. How do you encourage a supervisee that is not open to learning new skills or clinical interventions? That's
really tough.
I was going to say, because you have like one minute left, so go for it, Ruth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's really tough. And I know exactly what you're feeling. And the idea is that a real honest conversation has to start and say, this is where we're moving, and I'm afraid you're going to be left behind. I'm going to be, the rest of your team is going to be learning X, Y, and Z, and we're going to be implementing, for example, recovery-oriented care or CBT or DBT or whatever direction it is you're going in. This is what we're all going to be doing, and if you're not doing that, that's going to be reflected on your performance evaluation. And you've been here for 30 years. That doesn't bode well for you. I want you to stay on, etc. So I think, right. To sort of those real deep down, dirty conversations, very respectfully, but you're essentially saying, if you're not going to, get on the boat with us, we're leaving you behind, because our mission, we still have our mission and we're still going forward.
Awesome. Good advice, Ruth. So because we are just at the 1 o'clock mark, I'm going to close out the questions. We do have probably another 10 questions that we didn't get to. So Ruth, thank you for agreeing to work with me on answering these questions. And folks listening in today, we are certainly going to be able to put like an FAQ document together, and we'll send that over to you all along with a list of resources for you to take a look at. I do want to thank Ruth again one more time for presenting for us today, and I want to thank all of you for listening in. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. It's been a pleasure.